I was able to get that's not from the actual performance, which brings me to what I began with, was in terms of how to talk about performance if we're not recording it. Because I got it from other performances that these artists did. If you could go to the last slide, thank you. What Le Petit Versailles has done, though, to record visually some things, is they recorded Le Petit Versailles TV. And they've engaged Community and Television in 2006. They're part of Allied Productions. And they were awarded a New York City cable access provider, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, grant to produce a 12-part cable series entitled LPV TV that highlights the myriad garden events occurring at Le Petit Versailles. The series features local and visiting artists that have used the garden as a platform to exhibit, curate, enlighten, and entertain audiences on subjects and mediums ranging from preservation of public spaces and health to community and community activism and the arts. Could you play, what is the next one? Is there no next one? I think that's what it is. And then we can go to number 1. Can you do number 1? Because I think number 1 is the last.
Welcome to the Garden of the Petit Versailles.
This is the trailer for LPV TV.
One of you is Peter, who organized this whole season each year. Thank you all for coming. It's a great honor to have you here, to have you so close by. First of all, I'd like to thank the gardeners that made the garden possible. A special shout out to all, and to our supporters, and also some individual donations, and of course our audiences.
That was just a trailer, anyway. Is it still going? Oh, you can keep going.
As far as Western media as opposed to Eastern media,
Can you turn the volume up a bit?
as opposed to
The
worldwide
volume?
media, I think that there is no distinction. I feel like everybody in the world is a product of media in these days. The fact that a company like Coca-Cola can spray their logo all over the Himalayas, whether it be illegal or not, and have very little repercussions with regards to that, is just another example of how entrenched media and advertising and propaganda and ideas that are made by profiteers and thrust upon us is a worldwide.
This was a human sculpture they made with paper mache.
Made measurable to us, but it's also deeply embedded. It's deeply embedded in the storyline. After a while, we're not going to get pleasure unless we get another big hit. So now I don't want to see one person die. I want to see 10 die at a time. And now I want to see one car blow up, because I've seen that. I kind of surprised me with that. Like, oh, been there, done that, seen that. Okay, that's it.
It's basically sort of me doing my best to try and make myself, like, desirable. And stuff like that. My film is going to be all about metal meditation. I'm going to be trying, I'm making it up to tell you what I go. Shamba, Mula, Musa, Olobo, H, Tata, Goel. Estes, Zumbada, Ulubu, Subudu, Ulubu, Subudu, Tumba, Ba, Kusa, Goama, Ba,
That was just a trailer for the LPTV 12-part series they made, and it just documented a part of what they were working on throughout the last few years. Like I said, they don't really put up their work in terms of public access to see videos of it. So most of what I was able to show you, the stills were from the performances, but the actual videos I had to take from other performances of the performance, which of course changes the performance. But how do we talk about it? I could have talked about it without showing you, of course, but I thought that might be a bit more confusing. This series itself features local and visiting artists who participate as curators and as artists, or as one or the other. The performance space is, ultimately, Le Petit Versailles has become one of New York's premier performance spaces, where curatorial practices are either incorporated into the production itself, where each piece or series of performances, or curating of poetry or music, etc., becomes part of the piece, and where the performance engages the liminal spaces where identity meets grassroots politics, queer bodies, and discursive fragments of a long-muted histories, while redefining artistic genre amidst a politically active and squatted green space. The original curators, Waters and Kramer, have not only recreated a radical space for avant-garde performance and art installation, but they have likewise brought together local communities of Manhattan's East Village and the Lower East Side in the spirit of curating art, keeping a green space of the city active. They also produce vegetables and fruit, which you can sort of see on the map, but it grows things somewhat. And they keep the part of the city very vibrant and alive as New York is back in, it's heading towards where it was in the 1970s with the poverty that's currently going on in the city. The Petit Versailles has become an open space for social inclusion, artistic practices, and conterminous redefinitions of the role of the curator and artist, who are both inside this community but also continually questioning from outside his or her relationship to this space, to various artistic forms, and to the institutional practices that allow such a performance space to flourish. So that's my talk. Sorry, I could barely read what I had written because of the light, so it was sort of hard. But I'll open it up. I raised several questions, and I really didn't try to answer them because I don't think my questions are particularly answerable, because I think a lot of what I'm asking is part of the practice itself of both artistic production, performance, and curation. But I would be interested in what you think.
I think I still need to do the summary, Carnegie.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I'll take on it.
Yeah. Do you want this?
I can do it from here, maybe? Yeah, I think I can do it from here because the audience is not there. Oricum հայերի բացապես շատկաց ներկայացնել, ինչպես երեք, բայց մի քիչ ավելի կարճ։ Ջուլիան Վիգոն, ով մարդաբան է, արվեստագետ, պերֆորմանս և վիդեո արտիստ, նաև դասավանդել Լոնդոնի Փոլսմիթ համալսարանում, ներկայացնում է հանրային վայրում կամ հանրային վայրը ներգրավելու կամ գրավելու մի փորձ, որ տեղի ունեցել 70-ականներին, սկսվել 70-ականների Նյու Յորքում, մի խմբի կողմից, որ կոչվում է Լեկտիվ Վերսալ, փոքր Վերսալ, եւ այս պրակտիկան պետք է դիտարկել քաղաքային վայրերի փոխադրման, քաղաքային վայրի միջավայրի փոխադրման ու քանի քաղաքականությունների կառուցվածքային փոփոխությունների մեջ, որոնք տեղի են ունենում մասնավորապես Նյու Յորքում 70-ականներին, երբ բազմաթիվ վիճաբանություններ կային հողի շահագործման, հողի տնօրինման հետ կապված, եւ նաեւ ճգնաժամ կար, որ կապված էր այդպես անշարժ գույքի հետ։ Այսինքն տեղի սկսվել են մասնավորեցման մի գործընթաց, երբ նախկինում այդպես անուշադրության մատկված, բայց արվեստագետների կողմից բնակեցված տարածքները սկսում էին հանձնել մասնավոր դերերի եւ գնում էր այդպես ջենտրիֆիկացիայի մի պրոցես։ Եվ ակտիվիստական արվեստային այս խմբերը սկսում են կատարողական միջամտություններ կատարել հենց այս կոնտեքստում, եւ այդ միջամտություններից մեկը ֆոտովերսալն է, որը նման տարածություն գրավելով ստեղծում է մի այգի, որը դառնում է համայնքային այդպես ներառման մի վայր։ Այդ այգում տեղի են ունենում բազմաթիվ այդպես պերֆորմատիվ իրադարձություններ։ Այստեղ սա մի վայր էր, որտեղ արվեստը հանդիպում էր քաղաքական սուր հարցերին, համայնքային խնդիրներին, իհարկե քաղաքական հարցերի թվում են տարբեր ժամանակներում տարբեր խնդիրներ, ասենք 90-ականների սկզբին Իրաքի պատերազմը կամ 80-ականների վերջին 90-ականների Սիրիայի ճգնաժամը, Միացյալ Նահանգներում, ինչպես նաև ուրիշ խոսակցության առարկա է, բայց ֆինանսավորման այդ կանավեճերը, որ տեղի են ունենում կոնսերվատիվ, պահպանողական և լիբերալ թևերի միջև Միացյալ Նահանգներում, արվեստի հանրային ֆինանսավորման ճգնաժամ։ Եվ մինչև հիմա գործում է այս խումբը եւ այդպես պրակտիկաների մասին կոնկրետ այդպես շատ ավելի բան չեմ ասի, քան այն, որ այնինչ տեսակ, այսինքն փորձում են գործարկել, յուրացնել հին ժանրեր, ասենք Բրեխտի էպիկական թատրոնի օրինակը կամ կաբարեն որպես ժանր եւ վերագործարկելով, ասենք կարծես վերացած հին ժանրերը բարձրացնում են առօրյա աշխարհական հետաքրքիրներ, որոնք կապված են տարօրինակով քույր ինքնությունների հետ, սեռականության, կրկին քաղաքական հարցերի եւ այլն եւ այլն։ Եվ դրանցից մեկը առաջին կաբարեն էր, որ տեսակ, երբ կաբարե, որը այդպես շատ կոնկրետ, շատ ուղղակիորեն փոխարում էր դարասկզբի գերմանական մշակութային հղումները 20-ականների մասնավորապես, որպեսզի անդրադառնար կամ վերհիշեր աքսորիալ լինելու իրադրությունը։ Իհարկե խոսքը գնում է պատերազմի նախամուտին եւ պատերազմի ընթացքում աքսորված կամ ինքնաթսորի ենթարկված գերմանացի, գերմանացի մշակութային գործիչների, ինտելեկտուալների եւ ընդհանրապես քաղաքացիների մասին։ Եվ ըստ Ջուլիանի սա մի օրինակ է, որտեղ այս փոքր վերսալ կատարումը խումբը մի օրինակ է, որտեղ արվեստագետներն իրենք են համադրում, փորձում են գտնել ինստիտուցիոնալ կառուցվածքային այնպիսի մի ձևեր, որոնք չեն համակերպվում այդպես արդեն հաստատված կառուցվածքների հետ, այդպես այլընտրանքային ձևեր են որոնում, եւ սա մի վայր է, որտեղ ինքնությունը հանդիպում է ներքևից եկող քաղաքականությանը, տեղային համայնքների խնդիրներին եւ տարօրինակող ինքնություններին ու դարձել այդպես հասարակական վերանման մի վայր, որը եւ արվեստային է եւ քաղաքական։ Okay, so we can now go back to the questions.
What was the difference between your proposition to work with community? Louder. What was
Do you
the
want to use this?
We don't need this, right?
yeah?
Oh, if it's enough, you can take it down. Yeah, electricity. Yeah.
I would like to ask, what was the difference between your proposition to work with community in La Petite Versailles and the proposition of a different institutions which are dealing with this problem? Because I don't know a lot about this New York scene and this kind of strategies there. So it's interesting for me what kind of, because you mentioned that the modes of production were very important in all these performances that were taking place in this let's say they call themselves institution or yeah. So this is my first question, and second, how they deal with the history of the institution, because it was also interesting that they are not documenting all the performances. So what they are documenting, how they want to historicize their practice, yeah?
They started documenting at one point some of the performances. I think they actually keep it for only documentation purposes, not to show as the performance. I think that's the difference. Because when I asked Jack and Peter, can you send me some stuff from these pieces? They're like, oh, what's online? So I think they want to keep what's online type of profile to, therefore, performance remains live in a sense. If you want to see it, go there. And you all should go there, by the way. As far as this question of institutionality, I mean, they're very aware of this. Like I mentioned, when they were doing ABC No Rio, they were living in the basement, writing grants to keep it going. And ABC No Rio was one of the most important performance spaces in the village in the 80s and 90s. It still continues, but it's that the way in which open mic performance or spoken word performance is somewhat considered passé today. That still has a tradition going on in New York City. And I remember when I saw Penny Arcade's performance of Bitch Fag Dyke, oh my god, here I go again. Bitch Fag Hag Dyke Whore, I think that's it. When I saw this in London, the audiences in London really didn't get it, because it's a very specific New York genre, which I found very interesting, because the New York audience, the London audiences were like, you know, she got panned in The Guardian, and then she made that part of her performance. And she also updates her performance, so she makes fun of people who want to be interns for Abramovich. It's quite funny. You should see it just for that, because I think as curators you would laugh. It takes the piss out of Marina Abramovich's groupies of sorts. Now, what is the institution, though? I mean, this is what I asked at the beginning in terms of they have to finance what they're doing. As you noticed on the flyers, there's always the logos of the New York Park, New York Foundation for the Arts. The NEA was totally destroyed in the late 80s and early 90s. So funding from those organizations, paradoxically, has to go through formal channels. As an individual artist in the US today, you have to be associated with one of these major galleries or an institution. that's a problem for them as well, because there's another paradox here. They're constantly in court fighting to keep the space. They're constantly suing or being sued and defending their squatting of the space. So it's quite interesting. If you look, it's an active art space that's a squat, like, you know, in the tradition of Berlin squatting, but yet it's publicly alive. And it's not just for housing, it's actually a social space and an art, it's an art space. I mean, people really go there for the art. It's not like you go and get a drink. People are showing up to create and to perform or to be spectators, basically. But this raises a question of institutionality today. And what I asked Angela on Monday after her talk is it's very relevant, her talk, and my question about that was about how do we frame art today when the art is already being framed for us by granting institutions. That's the real institution. I hate to say it. I wish it weren't. And then one could even look nostalgically to what's happened in the US. You know, you look back to Peggy Guggenheim. It's like, you have to read her autobiography. It's one of the best ever. But what she did for the art world came about largely because of her parent, you know, her father dying on the Titanic. And you had art being subventioned by private donors who actually had less political control over the art than public institutions, let's say, in the US, you know. So the whole Jesse Helms obsession over Mapplethorpe's black buttocks, you know, if you recall him talking about that, is insane, because today you have a safe haven, paradoxically, within private hands. So that's in the States. It changes drastically when you get to Europe, the UK and mainland Europe alike. How do we look to art? Is it institution? Can it be grassroots anymore? These kinds of things happen. I just left Faenza in Italy, where there's a place called Il Clandestino, and it's a performance space. It's basically a bar and restaurant, but that's sort of secondary to what it used to be, at least in the 90s and early zeros. It was very much a performance space. And it would have concerts formally, but it would also have art performances there. And this happens, but it becomes more about keeping a bar alive. This is a space that in and of itself is not about money. You don't have to pay to go if you don't have money. There's a bucket to take collections if people can help out, but most of the people there are really dirt poor. So it's fascinating to see how even Waters and Kramer keep this going on a shoestring budget, you know. So the institutionalization rests between the public spectatorship that often doesn't give because it can't, the institutional support, and then, like I showed you the last clip of the LPV TV, which was very much, it looked very public access television, you know, because it sort of plays into that. And that was one way they had of making money through the DVD collection. Another reason why he didn't send me the clips, because that's on their DVD, right? Again, Abramovich's filming of herself. It's interesting because artists have to survive, and is that the way they can? And then what happens to the actual art as a result?
Thank you very much. I have actually some comments, more general, that come to my mind now, making a comparison between your lecture and the lecture of Adham. And I thought it's very interesting because we raised these questions, and it's actually, from my point of view, no difference between I talk not about the content, but the way of what is the decision, because each of us that has to have a presentation, and we are all, let's say, coming from a certain specialist field, you make a decision what you will talk and what you will present in a certain context, and this is always a risk. Absolutely, it's no guarantee that the things will be accepted, that the things will be understood. But I just wanted to say that when you raised yesterday the question, today actually you can get the answer. Yeah. Because in a certain way, the lecture in the format was as so to say, private as it was Adham. Because the opera house in Egypt, the whole talk about that we don't know because we just got information and it was super. Realized that something like this exists. Here it's the same case. It's a particular project that has the same, we don't know, we have to trust. A particular project that is, but the change is very, very important. There it's Egypt and here it's New York, and the discourse is different. Because here it's big narratives, is a certain vocabulary that we inherited because we are all coming from a certain field that we use, like criminality, many words. But practically the question that you posed yesterday, authorization, here it's actually really clearly seen. The authorization is not voluntaristic act, but it's voluntary in the term that you decide what you will speak. But the, so to say, connection to a discourse, it's coming through also our already framed ways, this I call imperial art historian, art critical institutional framework that are artistic, theoretical, critical, that we can actually engage. In cabaret, we see the futurist, we see the Dada, we can think what we want. And there, because it was both about performance, but there we have no idea. I mean, we see something, we can speculate, but here we feel much more familiar. And I thought it's, for me, was interesting precisely that making a parallel. These two things are not actually afar, but afar is the place from where, and we are not just tabula rasa, how we actually engage. So this is maybe some answer also about the context. It's not about the context, where is Egypt and where is New York, but the context also of our knowledge, of the process of formation. And I thought it's very interesting to think, because yesterday it was a drama. I found like this, what is now the person talking? But today it could be also a drama, because in, I don't know, from a place where I'm coming is the same center. The same, but I'm not sure that anybody is interested what in Slovenia we were doing for the last 20 years, because we are not important in the term of a geopolitical division that is there present, not as an adjective, but a certain difference in discourses, what is normalizing and what we actually learn. Because in the school we get, I mean, all these vocabularies, we are constantly bombed by them, and also the decision which kind of sources in interpretation we will make recourse, like, I don't know, because I remember it was a very good text, and I finish immediately, by Deutsche, how is her name?
Rosalind?
Yes, Rosalind Deutsche, because she, for example, in 90s, she made an analysis of these ideas. It's one of the seminal texts. I think everybody has to read this if you study theory, critical. It's no. And in that text, Rosalind Deutsche said in the 90s, she, because the ideological moment is very important, ideology is precisely this construction, this context. And she said that all these things about this gardening, all these things practically had, they started as a kind of empowerment, but actually they transformed in a certain privatization of a certain fake naturalization of a certain community. And in the long run, they started to be ghettos by themselves, but for a specific community thing. And so what I want to say, the whole story here also has to be maybe seen also historically in the theoretical approach, and I think theory is very important, because without theory, and theory is not a fetish, it's also class and race divided. You can enter the interpretation, because from where it's our vocabulary is coming. I mean, we don't talk about I don't know, our private things, but we talk with a certain tools that are coming from a certain theoretical context, and it's historicized.
Yeah,
So
theory
I just
is
wanted
also-
to make a
Theory can be fetishize, I would argue as well. Like when I was writing this piece, I was getting death threats from trans women about another piece I wrote. And I went onto my friend's website because they were talking about this queer artist, and I said, I don't know about the word queer anymore because here in the UK it doesn't mean what it means back home, because this was, this is sort of my Kansas, yeah? And I had a real breakdown about the word queer because of what politics have emerged in the UK since mid-January, if you've read the Guardian piece by Julie Burchill. Anyways, that fallout affected my reading of the word queer and of queer theory itself, and I had to sort of catch up to certain offshoots of queer theory that have, in fact, become very conservative in my reading. So I think theory can be, it depends on how it's used and framed and historicized. At the same time, both Kramer and Waters are very steeped in theory. Waters taught for a long time in Amherst, Massachusetts, teaching critical theory. Oh, thank you so much. You're so sweet. And also there's the aspect of, there's the aspect of what it means to, this question of institutionalization goes back to theory as well. The way in which one of my professors at NYU in the early 90s was working on what was called testimonial literature, a testimonial, which was born in Latin America. And it became contentious for the New York University rector, who disinvited him to teach there. But then when testimonial, that was in the 80s, when testimonial became a popular media, he was invited not only back to NYU, but to co-chair American Studies. So the way theory, can be popular or unpopular also has certain reactions by the academic structures that foment this kind of narrative. And I'm in and out of academia, I'm aware of this, and I have problems with it at times. I was just reading an article yesterday about how dependency theory has figured in to academia, and dependency theory was very much a part of economic theories of the 70s and 80s. And I didn't understand dependency theory until I lived in Haiti in 2010. Then I understood dependency theory. So it's interesting how theory might even predate a certain reality or understanding. But back to this idea of geographies and understanding, Kulthum, I understood her from Morocco. I arrived in Rabat in 1992, May, and first thing I heard everywhere, in fact, in Morocco, every city you hear on the public coffee house speakers is Kulthum, not Boujdoub, who's a very important Andalusia singer, not any of the popular Moroccan singers. You hear Kulthum everywhere, but it wasn't out of context. What Adham showed us yesterday, Kulthum performing for the king, in Morocco. Just because it's an Arab context. If I speak my dialect of Arabic in Egypt, they look at me and they say Maghrabia. They ask me if I'm Moroccan, and when I say no, they go through all the other countries. They say, Algerian? No. Tunisian? No. Then they say, your father's a Moroccan? No. And you go through this. So my reading of Kulthum is actually posited through my not being Moroccan, but somehow living there and understanding her beingness. And then you have another great singer who's considered almost as great as Kulthum, which is, and she's a living singer, Warda. Her name means rose in Arabic. She's Egyptian, but she's not really Egyptian. She's co-opted Egyptian, Algerian, born. And the four great singers, in fact, in the Arab world are her, Kulthum, Fairuz, Asmahan, and Warda. And each of them have their own sort of historical take. But why we wouldn't have understood, let's say Adam's talk yesterday would have more to do about not only our access to knowing who they are, or having watched, let's say, Michael Goldman's biographical pic on Kulthum, or living in Egypt or anywhere in the Arab world, that might be part of it, but it's also the way we teach in the West. So once upon a time when I was at the Université de Montréal, I was both in 2 departments, and when I was teaching a film course in film studies, the chair said to me, when you do this course, don't spend more than 3 weeks. I swear to God he said this. Don't spend more than 3 weeks on Godard. And I was so pissed off because, I mean, the arrogance of him thinking in a 12-week semester, I would spend even 1 week on Godard. And I said to him, who is Godard? And he was furious, of course, but the fact is that they didn't dream. In a Quebec institution, it's assumed that when you teach film studies, you start at Renoir and you end at Invasion Barbare, or something like that, a Canadian, Quebec film. They would never think that I would go outside of the French canon. And that was the ethnocentrism of Quebec 2003-4. So maybe how we access these pieces has more to do with our own ethnocentricity rather than the curator's choice, I would argue,
This is connected, because, for example, you could go and make a presentation. I don't want to make some kind of big history, because I think it's super for us to learn. But, for example, you could also talk about England. It's up to you what to talk, but you could talk about England and talk about the riots, for example, there, and make a selection and talk about spaces, I don't know, that may be erased, because if you think you talk about or connect these things, it's all the decision. But this decision, I just want to say, it's not out of the blue. It's connected with the processes behind of how, what we learn, how we actually also normalize certain discourses. And for me, it was just a comment here, interesting to see practically 2 completely same ideological formats in terms of structures, in which one thing is, it's not about life or not, one thing is put under question, and the other is actually can be taken as something that we are familiar. And I wanted to say that both things are actually unfamiliar, but the point of decision is practically this knowledge and these histories and these questions of the institutional part, from where we are speaking, what is actually in one way produced or reproduced in the process of study, from where we are coming and so on. So I just thought it's very interesting for us, this situation, because we are just here together, and every day we can make a relation that is super to think what we do, what we actually see in front of us, and also to answer or to connect what was the previous day. This, I think, is a super possibility, and because we don't know what will be the next, what will be tomorrow, what will be on Friday, and this, I think, is excellent regarding also the questions that are, all any questions that are. So, I just.
No, it's good that you raised this issue, because I totally agree with you about like the theoretical and ideological imprinting that we have as European. But actually, what we were trying to question yesterday was exactly this idea: how can we access to another context, trying to overcome this theoretical imprinting? Can we find strategies to do that, or is it just something that we cannot overcome? I mean, yes. For example, by listening to Julian, I found a lot of equivalent in my artistic experience in Italy, for example, and this is really it says a lot about that. For example, Isola Art Center, in a way, in Milano, and so this is a it's maybe it's a confirmation.
We were
yeah.
It's familiar to them, and I just wanted to explain that it's in every city is one exception.
Yeah.
But it's important.
Can I ask you a specific question about the garden? Since it was founded in 1986 and 1986, 96, and still ongoing, and I'm wondering what strategies, how the strategies of performance in the garden and of the garden have responded or have have responded to the strategies of economic gentrification in that time span. So what are the kind of, New York from 1996 to today, how has that also altered the strategies in the garden and vice versa?
Well, I think I've been going to the garden since 2002, because I actually, it's a funny story, but I ran into them at the Venice Biennial back in 2001, and they were in the queue to get a pass. I think we were in the press pass or something. Anyway, it turns out I ended up living in a flat on the same block. So I was going all the time to these events. And at the time, 96 was before the crash, they had more money. So they were able to do more in terms of like when you see that in the video, yes, there was that like balloon snake thing, and those kinds of elements could be bought more easily. They get funding nonetheless from donations, but it's not enough to cover more than, let's say, the light and electricity. That's their major expense. Because even though they're squatting the space, they pay the bills for the space nonetheless. But how the art has changed, it really still coming from the community, so I haven't noticed that it's becoming like, it's not like they can't do more video production because they can't afford the monitor or whatnot. But a lot of the artists, like you saw one, there was a Caterina Del Mar, she showed her video, her work on, it was a video on girl gang surfers, yeah, that she filmed in outside of LA, Pasadena area. And it was about these girl gangs, and they had the money to put that up and to show it. It was together with 5 other videos. So they have to buy like these screens and so forth, and they get destroyed sometimes by weather conditions. So they're able to keep up that kind of budget. I'd say what they've been able to do to maybe help economically is do more exchange programs with other artists. So they've done a lot of work in Germany, Austria. Last year they were in Germany. They've gone to Australia. Where else? Italy. Yeah, they've done work in those places in recent years. I think they were supposed to go to Slovenia or Croatia. I'm not sure if that's happened yet. But they do exchanges so that they can get funding, let's say from DAD or something, and then that helps artists come and do their work there, and they go and they sort of do like, exchanges. Is that?
I think it's interesting that a lot of my art students are now gardening, and that's become part of the kind of institutionalized into art schools. Mm-hmm. There's an entire kind of discourse and practice. Fritz Haig, even working in Italy, of the way that these, kind of non-space or other spaces have now been completely institutionalized into art schools.
Well, I've been trying to get the Tate to let me put a garden on the roof. That's been an uphill battle. But Shoer, who was here 3 years ago, has been helping me with this. But they have like bees on their roof. And then one of the roofs of the Tate Britain isn't strong enough. But they're very aware of the way that art and gardening has come together by certain artists. I mean, obviously Richard Long, sort of, if you think about that. But more specifically, the Serpentine, not this past year, the year before in 2011, had the pavilion and their weekend marathon. It's called the Weekend Marathon. Yes, it was on gardening. And it was the marathon October 2011. It's very worth listening to those podcasts. They should have video casts. And you can see them, but it was all about art and the green spaces, to include the pavilion that was built, which was very much surrounding the garden that was centered on. Yeah. Yes?
Can we have the last question?
Okay. Someone else has their hand up. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at remembering. No?
I had one, but I didn't pass it to Harvard and then he talked to me. No, you don't? Okay. I wanted to ask about what to make out of the appropriation of the specific, let's call them like outmoded, but not in a negative sense, genres.
Yeah.
as a sort of like artistic or aesthetic or political tool? Why do they choose the specific genres and forms the way they do? Not in terms of what they say within them, but the genre itself.
Well, the Exit Cabaret, for instance, they were a group that they worked through this medium. They've sort of changed what they do now, but the cabaret itself had a tradition with, let's say, all the exiled Jews, not just, let's say, the songwriters or Marlene Dietrich, who with, von Sternberg sought exile in the U.S., but then you have all of the diaspora of children of Holocaust survivors in New York City. Some of those performers were those. And then the notion of sexual exile, because Exil Cabaret focuses on gender and sexuality exile a lot, as you saw in that first piece. And the idea that is it out? I guess I would ask, is it ever outmoded, or is it just upgraded? In a sense. I need to find the name of this, but I went to this private viewing of a gallery in New York back in around '98. Of a really amazing, elaborate cabaret trapeze thing. It was like out of this world. I was lucky enough to get invited and go. There were only 50 of us there, maybe. And it wasn't the first time I'd seen cabaret used as art form. There's something about the way in which cabaret has these undertones, this almost Weltschmerz sentiment going on at the same time as celebration of something else. So it's heavy and light at the same time, dark and like the secretive nature of what was then, let's say, Berlin, early 20th century, and hiding sexualities to this on the stage. How can you hide? You're on the stage singing about it. So there's a lot of contradictory elements that come out of what is outmoded, but going back to like Penny Arcade's performances even there, or they do a collaboration with Millennium Film Film Cooperative or something. I'm sorry, I'm really bad at names. But Sarah runs it, and my films are stocked there. Now, all the filmmakers of the East Village, we sort of keep a library of all of our works. And so she'll come and show East Village filmmakers' films, just film night. So it becomes even like an exhibition space for works that aren't often seen. Just a block away, though, from Jonas Mekas, or 2 blocks away, I'm sorry, from Jonas Mekas' Anthology Film Archives, where, of course, he harbors the greatest collection of unseen films, but of, let's say, a genre of these, Pasolini, Passion According to St. Matthew. So you've got not even a competition happening. It's sort of, maybe one day Jonas will take these films, or he has the largest collection of Fluxus, art, and it was very much involved in the happening scene. So in a way, I'd say that the Petit Versailles is very much a happening as well. And it's a very interesting happening because it functions on the level of social and art, and it's both spontaneous because it's neighborhoody, and it's not because you can't get in if the gates are locked. Unlike a gallery that has a badly paid attendant or an intern, right, to sit there and look like they enjoy what they're doing. So it does raise interesting questions for even the ethics of galleries today, that while they're facing cuts, more and more galleries, even on Cork Street in London, there are times you'll go and it'll be shut down because they can't afford to keep the doors open sometimes, certain